Imagine you are 19 years old. You drop out of Stanford University. You put on a black turtleneck sweater. You deliberately lower your voice by 3 octaves to sound like a middle-aged man. And suddenly, the most brilliant billionaires and the most decorated military generals in America are voluntarily throwing $9 billion directly at your face. By 2014, this young woman was crowned the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. Her face was plastered across every major magazine cover from Forbes to Fortune. She was sitting on panels with former presidents. She was celebrated as the absolute next Steve Jobs. She promised a medical revolution. A miracle machine that could run hundreds of complex medical tests using just one single drop of blood from your fingertip. No more big scary needles. No more expensive hospital visits. Just a tiny prick in a magical black box that would tell you everything from your cholesterol levels to whether you had cancer. But that is not the craziest part of this story. The craziest part is that this magical revolutionary machine never actually worked. Not even a little bit. It was essentially a useless piece of plastic with a glowing light on it. Let us break down the sheer absurdity of this delusion. Imagine walking into a car dealership. The salesperson points to a cardboard box with wheels painted on it and tells you it has a revolutionary new engine that runs on a single drop of tap water. You ask to look under the hood. The salesperson says no, that is a strict trade secret. You ask to take it for a test drive. The salesperson says no, you just have to believe in the vision. Any normal person would laugh and walk away immediately. But when Elizabeth Holmes did the exact same thing with a medical blood testing device, the smartest men in the room nodded in agreement and wrote her checks with lots of zeros. Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State, joined her board. James Mattis, a 4-star Marine general, joined her board. Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul, gave her over $100 million of his own cash. They were all completely mesmerized by the illusion. If a tech founder sells you a fake crypto token, you just lose your savings. But when a college dropout sells you a fake medical device, she is literally playing Russian roulette with your actual life. And the most respected investors in Silicon Valley gave her the gun and bought all the bullets. This video is not going to teach you about hematology or laboratory science. This video is going to strip naked the toxic culture of fake it until you make it. It will show you exactly how a charismatic sociopath exploited the arrogance of the tech industry and the fear of needles to build an empire out of absolute thin air. Welcome to the bloodiest scam in Silicon Valley history. You think she was a medical prodigy here to save humanity? Hold on. Let us rewind the tape to the very beginning of this bizarre corporate cosplay. Meet Elizabeth Holmes. She was not a brilliant chemist. She was not a seasoned doctor with decades of rigorous laboratory experience. She was just an ambitious teenager who dropped out of college with a frightening obsession. She did not just admire the founder of Apple. She actively tried to reincarnate him. She studied his specific mannerisms. She adopted his exact daily wardrobe. Every single day she put on that iconic black turtleneck. She drank the exact same weird green smoothies. She even consciously lowered her vocal pitch to sound more authoritative and masculine. It was a meticulously calculated performance art piece. Imagine going to a hospital for open heart surgery. The surgeon walks in wearing a cape and a mask and says, "Do not worry, I have never been to medical school, but I have watched every single Batman movie, so I am basically a superhero." You would run out of the operating room screaming for your life. But in Silicon Valley, they do things completely differently. When the venture capitalists saw this young woman perfectly mimicking the aesthetic of a legendary tech icon, their critical thinking completely shut down. They did not ask to see peer-reviewed scientific papers. They did not demand rigorous independent clinical trials. Picture the boardroom of a massive investment firm. A senior partner points at her and whispers to his colleagues, "Look at her intense, unblinking stare and that black turtleneck. She is the female Steve Jobs. We have to give her money right now before she changes the world without us." A junior analyst timidly raises his hand and says, "Sir, she has absolutely no background in biomedical engineering, and her machine sounds physically impossible according to the laws of thermodynamics." The senior partner glares at him and says, "Shut up, you idiot. You are going to make us miss out on the next Apple." They were so desperate to find the next mythical visionary that they willingly bought into a cartoonish imitation. She sold them a beautiful narrative. A tiny drop of blood from a painless finger prick that could magically detect hundreds of diseases in a matter of minutes. It sounded exactly like science fiction because it was exactly that. Fiction. She realized early on that she did not need a working product if she had an invincible shield of credibility. So she collected powerful old men like they were rare trading cards. She recruited former secretaries of state. She brought in retired military commanders. These were men who knew how to run global wars and negotiate complex international treaties, but they knew absolutely nothing about microfluidics or blood testing technology. Imagine hiring a world-class pastry chef to fix the nuclear reactor in a military submarine. It makes zero logical sense. But to the outside world, this prestigious board of directors looked like an impenetrable fortress of trust. If legendary politicians trust her, then she must be a verified genius, right? That is the exact psychological trap she set. And the entire American financial establishment walked right into it with their eyes wide open and their wallets completely unzipped. This is where things got completely out of control. By 2015, Theranos was not just a startup anymore. It was a $9 billion religion. Elizabeth Holmes was the undisputed high priestess of Silicon Valley. She was on the cover of Forbes. She was on the cover of Fortune. She was named one of the most influential people in the world by Time magazine. The hype machine was running on absolute maximum overdrive. Everyone wanted a piece of the magic blood box. The fear of missing out was so intense that investors were literally throwing millions of dollars at her without even looking at a single financial statement. Picture a high-level meeting inside the headquarters of Walgreens, a massive national pharmacy chain. A senior executive slams his fist on the table. He yells, "We need these Theranos wellness centers in our stores right now." A cautious medical consultant raises his hand. He says, "Sir, we have not actually seen the machines work. They refuse to let our scientists validate the technology." The senior executive screams back, "I do not care if the machine is powered by magical hamsters running on a wheel. If we do not sign this deal, CVS will sign it tomorrow, and we will look like absolute fools. Give her whatever she wants. Do not ask questions. Just get the machines in the stores." So Walgreens signed a massive deal. They built beautiful wellness centers inside their retail pharmacies. They played soft, relaxing music. They hired technicians to wear crisp white lab coats. It looked perfectly legitimate. It looked like the future. But behind the curtain, it was a complete disaster. The engineers inside the Theranos laboratory were living in a constant state of pure terror. The magical Edison machine did not work. It was essentially a modified glue-dispensing robot trying to do complex chemistry. It was breaking down constantly. Parts were falling off. Blood was literally splattering all over the inside of the machines. Imagine you are an engineer at Theranos. You walk into Elizabeth Holmes' office. You are sweating profusely. You say, "Elizabeth, the Edison machine is fundamentally flawed. We cannot run accurate tests on such a tiny drop of blood. The laws of physics simply do not allow it." Elizabeth Holmes stares at you without blinking. She lowers her voice to that fake, deep tone. She says, "You are simply not working hard enough. You lack the grand vision. If you do not believe in the mission, you can leave right now. You are fired." This was no longer just a financial scam. This was a massive public health crisis waiting to happen. People were using these fake blood tests to make life or death medical decisions. Imagine a normal guy named John. John walks into a Walgreens pharmacy. John feels a little sick. John sees the shiny Theranos kiosk. The technician smiles and pricks his finger. A tiny drop of blood goes into a little plastic vial called a nanotainer. John goes home and feels great about the future of medicine. A few days later, John gets an email. The fake test results say he has extremely elevated prostate cancer markers. John panics. John cries. John writes his will. John spends thousands of dollars on invasive medical scans. And then the real doctors tell John that he is perfectly healthy. The Theranos machine simply made up the numbers. It was a random number generator disguised as medical science. The machine was so bad at testing blood that the company had to secretly cheat just to keep the illusion alive. How did they cheat? This is the most pathetic part of the entire scam. When you gave them your tiny drop of blood, they did not put it inside their magical Edison machine. Instead, they secretly carried your blood into a hidden laboratory in the basement. They bought massive traditional commercial blood testing machines from companies like Siemens. But here is the catch. Those big traditional machines require a large tube of blood drawn from your arm. They do not work with a tiny drop from a finger prick. So what did the brilliant minds at Theranos do? They simply added water. They diluted the tiny drop of blood to make it a larger volume. They watered down the blood so they could run it through the commercial machines. Imagine buying a bottle of fine, expensive wine. You take it home and realize the seller just poured one drop of wine into a bucket of dirty tap water and sold it to you for $1,000. That is exactly what Theranos was doing with human biology. The results were wildly inaccurate. Potassium levels were off the charts. Cholesterol numbers were completely fabricated. Pregnancy tests were giving false negatives and false positives. And Elizabeth Holmes knew all of it. She walked through the laboratory. She saw the commercial machines hidden behind locked doors. She saw the panicked scientists. But she kept putting on the black turtleneck. She kept lowering her voice. She kept going on national television and looking straight into the camera, lying through her teeth. She said the technology was perfect. She said it was changing the world. She built a $9 billion castle entirely out of lies, arrogance, and watered-down blood. And the financial elite just kept applauding. They were so desperate to find a female tech icon that they willfully ignored a mountain of red flags. The board of directors did not know anything. The venture capitalists did not care about anything except the valuation. The retail partners were just terrified of losing market share. It was a perfect storm of corporate greed and collective stupidity. But what is the actual truth behind this magical black box? Let us explain this $9 billion medical miracle so that a 5-year-old child can easily understand the fraud. Imagine a person goes to a fancy 5-star restaurant. The chef comes out in a pristine white coat and promises a revolutionary dining experience cooked by a proprietary artificial intelligence oven. The person orders the most expensive steak on the menu. The person waits in the beautiful dining room listening to classical music. But what happens inside the kitchen? There is no artificial intelligence oven. The chef quietly climbs out the back window. The chef runs across the street to a cheap fast food drive-thru. The chef buys a soggy hamburger. The chef brings the hamburger back to the kitchen, puts the hamburger on a fancy ceramic plate, and serves the hamburger with an arrogant smile. That is exactly how the Theranos Edison machine operated. Elizabeth Holmes claimed Elizabeth Holmes had invented a miniaturized laboratory. Elizabeth Holmes called the machine the Edison. The Edison was a sleek black box that looked like an expensive computer server. A technician puts a tiny nanotainer of blood inside, and the machine supposedly performed complex chemistry. But the inside of the Edison was not a medical marvel. The inside was a clunky modified glue dispensing robot that simply could not handle fluid dynamics. The robotic arms were clumsy. The blood would literally spill all over the internal circuits. The machine would overheat and completely crash. The laws of physics strictly dictate that no scientist can run hundreds of tests on a single drop of capillary blood. Doing so is scientifically impossible. But Elizabeth Holmes did not care about physics. Elizabeth Holmes cared about the valuation. So how did the company process the tests for real paying patients? Let us imagine a late night shift inside the secret Theranos basement laboratory. A young, stressed-out lab technician is staring at a broken Edison machine. The machine is actively leaking blood and smoking. A senior manager walks in and says the lab just got 50 patient samples from the Walgreens pharmacy upstairs and the lab needs results in 1 hour. The young technician looks terrified and replies, "But sir, the Edison machines are completely broken. Even if the machines worked, there is not enough blood in these tiny tubes to run a standard panel." The manager lowers the voice and says, "Do not use the Edison. Just take the tiny blood drops, dilute the drops with saline water, and run the drops through the big commercial Siemens machines hidden behind that partition wall." The technician asks, "Is diluting the blood not going to completely ruin the accuracy of the test results and potentially kill a patient?" The manager sneers and says the job is to protect the founder's vision, not to worry about the patients. Just add the water and hit print. Theranos was not a revolutionary healthcare technology company. Theranos was a highly inefficient and incredibly dangerous delivery service for traditional blood tests. The engineers essentially reinvented the wheel but made the wheel out of cheap plastic and then lied about the wheel. The marketing team slapped a shiny Apple aesthetic onto a fundamentally broken process. To keep the scam going, Elizabeth Holmes had to create an absolute culture of paranoia. If an employee asked too many questions, that employee was fired. If a scientist sent an email questioning the test results, that scientist was threatened by high-priced corporate lawyers. Theranos built a fortress of non-disclosure agreements to protect a machine that was basically a glorified paperweight. The entire mechanism was a black box of deceit where the only thing being successfully engineered was the public relations narrative. And then the day of judgment finally arrived. For years, the Silicon Valley elite and the massive media empires were completely blinded by the glamorous black turtleneck and the fake deep voice. But eventually the smell of rotting blood became too strong to ignore. The catalyst for the ultimate destruction of this $9 billion castle of lies was not a powerful government regulator or a genius tech billionaire. It was a stubbornly old-school investigative journalist named John Carreyrou working for the Wall Street Journal. Carreyrou did not care about the Steve Jobs cosplay. He did not care about the visionary rhetoric. He only cared about the cold, hard facts. And the facts he uncovered were absolutely horrifying. He started interviewing medical experts who laughed at the physical impossibility of the Edison machine. But more importantly, he found the brave whistleblowers inside the company. Young scientists who were losing their minds watching patients receive potentially fatal medical results. These young kids realized that if they stayed silent, people would literally die. They risked their entire careers and faced brutal intimidation tactics from an army of expensive corporate lawyers just to tell the truth. Carreyrou started tracking down the actual victims of this massive fraud. These were not just rich investors losing their extra yacht money. These were everyday human beings whose lives were thrown into absolute chaos. Imagine a pregnant woman going to the pharmacy for a simple routine checkup. The Theranos machine spits out a fabricated result telling her that she is actively having a miscarriage. She goes home in absolute agonizing grief. She plans a funeral in her head, only to find out from a real doctor days later that her baby is perfectly fine and the shiny black box just invented a tragedy out of thin air. Imagine a healthy middle-aged man receiving a report that his blood is full of aggressive cancer markers. He spends weeks saying goodbye to his family and draining his savings on emergency scans, only to realize the entire thing was a random software glitch inside a broken glue robot. This was not a harmless startup pivoting its business model. This was a psychological torture chamber operating under the guise of accessible healthcare. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published the explosive article. The headline was a massive sledgehammer that smashed the glass illusion into a million pieces. The article revealed the dirty little secret that Theranos was secretly using commercial Siemens machines and diluting patient blood. The entire medical and financial world gasped in collective horror. How did Elizabeth Holmes react to being caught red-handed? She did what any cornered narcissistic sociopath would do. She went on national television wearing her signature black turtleneck and doubled down on the lies. She looked directly into the camera lens and delivered her infamous line. First they think you are crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. She actually thought she could gaslight the entire universe. But gravity had finally caught up with the fraud. The dominoes began to fall with brutal velocity. The Food and Drug Administration raided the secret laboratories in California. The federal inspectors walked in and found a complete medical horror show. The labs were a biohazard nightmare. The machines were spectacularly inaccurate. The government immediately banned Elizabeth Holmes from owning or operating any medical laboratory. The massive retail partnership with Walgreens was instantly terminated. The glowing magazine covers turned into savage investigative exposes. The financial collapse was spectacular to witness. The $9 billion valuation did not just drop slowly. It vaporized. It plummeted from $9 billion to literally $0 almost overnight. The brilliant billionaires and the decorated military generals on the board of directors suddenly realized they had been played for absolute fools by a college dropout with a decent sales pitch. The private jets were grounded. The luxury headquarters was abandoned. The magical Edison machines were thrown into the garbage where they belonged. And then came the criminal trial. The glamorous tech icon was dragged into a federal courtroom. The fake deep voice magically disappeared. The black turtleneck was replaced by a conservative business suit. She tried to blame everyone else. She blamed her former boyfriend. She blamed her engineers. But the jury saw right through the performance. They saw the fabricated test results. They saw the diluted blood. They saw the absolute ruthless greed. The woman who promised to save humanity was convicted of massive wire fraud and sentenced to over 11 years in a federal prison. The visionary genius was officially recognized as nothing more than a dangerous criminal.
Silicon Valley will never run out of charismatic sociopaths willing to sell you a shiny box of nothing. They will always find a new aesthetic to hide their absolute incompetence. If you want to survive this relentless ecosystem of venture capital illusions and actually understand personal finance and investing without the ridiculous hype, you need to subscribe right now. Do not let your money or your actual blood become the exit liquidity for the next generation of tech bros playing dress up. And you absolutely cannot miss our next video. Next week, we are traveling back to the heart of the startup world to dissect a completely different kind of madness. We are going to meet a barefoot cult leader who somehow tricked the smartest investors on earth out of $47 billion. And what was his grand world-changing technological innovation? He was literally just renting out desks and chairs. You think fake blood tests are insane? Wait until you see a guy selling office space like it is a spiritual awakening. Let us look at the darkest irony of this entire spectacular collapse. The tech industry has a famous mantra: fake it until you make it. It is the absolute gospel of Silicon Valley. And honestly, if you are building a new food delivery app or a stupid photo sharing website, that mantra works perfectly fine. If your app crashes, a teenager just gets his pizza a little bit late. Nobody gets hurt. The stakes are incredibly low. But Elizabeth Holmes took that exact same careless software mentality and applied it directly to human biology. She looked at life and death medical decisions and decided they were just another software bug to be patched later. She treated human veins like lines of code that she could rewrite with a good marketing campaign. And the most terrifying part is not that a 19-year-old dropout had this delusional god complex. The terrifying part is that the entire American financial and political establishment completely enabled her. They were so blinded by their own desperate need to find the next visionary genius that they threw all scientific reality out the window. They wanted a female Steve Jobs so badly that they basically invented one out of thin air and ignored the trail of actual bodies she was leaving behind. We worship the aesthetic of innovation so much that we completely forget to check if the machine actually plugs into the wall. The enemy is not just the person wearing the black turtleneck. The enemy is the collective greed that allows the black turtleneck to walk into a room and walk out with $9 billion. As long as we keep blindly trusting charismatic storytellers over boring peer-reviewed science, there will always be another Theranos waiting in the shadows. So the next time a billionaire stands on a stage, lowers their voice, and promises you a magical shortcut to a perfect future, do yourself a massive favor. Turn around and walk out the door. Because the only thing they are disrupting is your bank account and maybe your life. Never ever confuse a good costume with actual genius.